I still remember the exact tone my dad used when he said, "Anthony, don't lie to us. We already know it was you." It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry in the way people expect anger to sound. It was worse than that. It was calm, settled, like the verdict had already been reached and this conversation was just a formality. I was 15 years old, standing barefoot on the cold kitchen tile, wearing a hoodie that smelled faintly like laundry detergent, trying to understand how my life had just flipped upside down in less than 10 minutes. One minute I was finishing homework at the table, the next I was being told I was a thief. And the part that still messes with my head years later is this. The only evidence was my older brother pointing at me and saying, "It was him. My name is Anthony." I was 15 when this happened. I'm in my late 20s now, and I've replayed that day in my head more times than I'd like to admit. Not because I'm obsessed with the past, but because that moment quietly shaped everything that came after it. The way my parents looked at me, the way my brother learned he could get away with things, the way I learned, very early on, that in my family, truth mattered less than convenience. Growing up, my family looked normal from the outside. Suburban house, 2 parents who stayed married, 2 kids, dinner at the table most nights. If you drove past our place, you'd probably think we were boring in the best possible way. But inside that house, there was a very clear hierarchy, and I was never confused about where I stood. My brother, Mark, was 3 years older than me. He was louder, more confident, better at sports, better at talking to adults. Teachers liked him. Coaches liked him. My parents liked him in that special way they reserved just for him. The way that came with extra patience, extra chances, and endless benefit of the doubt. I was the quiet one. The kid who followed rules, who didn't get into trouble, who kept his head down and tried not to cause problems. I didn't realize at the time that being the easy kid often just means you're the one who gets ignored. Or worse, the one who becomes convenient to blame. The money incident happened on a Tuesday. I remember that detail because Tuesdays were my mom's grocery day, which meant she always had cash in her purse. Not a lot, but enough. That morning, she realized some of it was missing. $40, to be exact. Not hundreds. Not something catastrophic. Just enough to cause tension. I was in my room when I heard her voice from the kitchen, sharp and confused. "That's strange," she said. "I know I had more than this." At first, it wasn't directed at anyone. Just a comment floating in the air. But comments like that never stay neutral for long. My dad asked if she was sure. She said yes. Mark wandered in, leaning against the counter, pretending to scroll on his phone. I came in last, already feeling that low-grade anxiety I always felt when something went wrong in the house, even if I hadn't done anything. My mom asked the question that started everything. "Did either of you take money from my purse?" I said no immediately. Mark didn't answer at first. He shrugged, then said, "Why would I do that?" There was a pause. A small one. The kind that shouldn't matter, but does. My mom looked at Mark, then at me. And then Mark laughed, this short, dismissive sound, and said, "I mean, it wasn't me. It was him." And he pointed. Right at me. I actually laughed too. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. I thought he was joking. I said, "What?" "No." I expected my parents to shut it down immediately. To say something like, "Don't accuse your brother without proof," or, "That's not funny." But they didn't. My dad frowned. My mom crossed her arms. The room shifted. "Anthony," my mom said, "be honest." I remember my heart starting to pound. Not because I was guilty, but because I suddenly realized they weren't treating this like a joke. I said, again, I didn't take it. I even explained where I'd been all day. School. Home. Homework. Same routine as always. Mark stood there quietly, letting me talk myself into a corner, wearing this almost bored expression like he was watching a show he'd already seen. My dad asked Mark why he thought it was me. Mark shrugged again and said, "He's always in your room. He knows where you keep your stuff. And he's been asking for money lately." That last part wasn't even fully true. I'd asked once if I could get money for a school trip. That was it. But the way Mark framed it made it sound like a pattern. Like motive. I tried to defend myself, but every word felt weaker than the last. The more I talked, the more frustrated my parents looked. My mom said something that still echoes in my head. "You know, Mark doesn't lie about things like this." And just like that, it was over. The decision was made. I was grounded. No phone. No going out. Extra chores. And the worst part wasn't even the punishment. It was the look of disappointment on my parents' faces, like I'd shattered some fragile image they had of me. I kept thinking, if I just stay calm, if I just keep telling the truth, they'll realize this doesn't make sense. But days passed, then weeks, and nothing changed. Mark got his $40 back, by the way. Not officially. It just reappeared. My mom said she must have miscounted. No apology. No conversation. Just a quiet reset, as if the accusation had never happened. Except it had. For me, it never went away. After that, something shifted. Every time something went missing, I felt eyes on me. A charger, a shirt, a few coins from the counter. Even when no one said anything, I could feel the suspicion. Mark leaned into it. He'd make little comments. Careful where you leave that. Or, Anthony's been around here a lot. Always said lightly. Always with that same half smile. And my parents never shut it down. I started pulling away, spending more time in my room, keeping to myself. I became hyper-aware of where my hands were, what I touched, how I moved through the house. It's strange how quickly you can start policing yourself when you realize no one else is going to defend you. Months later, the bank statement came up during a family argument. Not about me. Not about the money. About something else entirely. My parents were arguing with Mark about his spending. He was 18 by then. Still living at home. Still not working. My dad was frustrated, talking about responsibility, about learning the value of money. My mom pulled out old statements to prove how much they'd been supporting him. I wasn't even part of the argument. I was sitting on the couch, half listening, trying to stay invisible like I always did. But then my mom said something that made my head snap up. "And what about these withdrawals?" she asked, tapping the paper. "These cash withdrawals from months ago?" Mark froze. Just for a second. But I saw it. She read out the date. A Tuesday. The same Tuesday the $40 went missing. The room went quiet. My dad leaned in, squinting at the paper. Mark started talking fast, too fast, about how he didn't remember, about how it must have been something else. My heart was pounding again, but this time for a different reason. Pieces were lining up in my head, slow and heavy, like puzzle pieces you didn't even realize you were missing. No one had said my name yet. No one had looked at me. But I knew. I knew this was the moment everything I'd buried started clawing its way back to the surface. I watched my parents' faces as they studied that statement, watched confusion give way to something sharper. Suspicion. Real suspicion. And for the first time in months, it wasn't aimed at me. That silence after my mom read the date off the bank statement was different from any silence I'd ever felt in that house. It wasn't just awkward. It was heavy, like the air itself had thickened. For a moment, nobody spoke. My dad leaned closer to the paper, my mom's fingers still resting on the line with the withdrawal, and Mark stood there with his hands shoved into his hoodie pockets, rocking slightly on his heels. He was smiling, but it wasn't the confident, careless smile he usually wore. It was tight. Forced. I should have said something. I know that now. I should have stood up and pointed out the obvious connection. The date. The missing money. The accusation that had turned my life upside down. But 15-year-old me had learned a very specific lesson over those months. Speaking up didn't help. It made things worse. So I stayed quiet, sitting on the couch, my hands folded together, nails digging into my palms, watching the moment stretch. My mom finally broke the silence. "Mark," she said slowly, "do you remember taking out cash that day?" He shrugged, the same way he always did. "I don't know. Probably. I take cash out all the time." "That was the same day the money went missing from my purse," she said. Her voice wasn't accusatory yet, more confused than anything. Mark laughed, a little too loudly. "So? That doesn't mean anything." My dad looked up. "It kind of does," he said. "You told us Anthony took it." I felt my stomach twist when my name came up. Mark glanced at me, just briefly, and there it was. That look. The one that said, "Watch this." "I mean," Mark said, spreading his hands, "I thought it was him. I didn't know for sure." The room shifted again. My mom frowned. "You said you were sure." Mark rolled his eyes. "Mom, it was months ago. Why are we even talking about this now?" That should have been the moment everything cracked wide open. But it wasn't. Not yet. Because instead of pushing, instead of sitting with the discomfort and actually questioning what had happened, my parents did what they'd always done. They backed off. My mom sighed, folded the statement, and said, "Fine. This isn't important right now." And just like that, the truth slipped back under the surface. I remember sitting there afterward, feeling something cold settle in my chest. It wasn't relief. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was the realization that even when evidence stared them in the face, my parents still chose the path that caused the least friction. And that path almost never involved holding Mark accountable. From that point on, things didn't just go back to normal. They got worse. Mark took it as confirmation that he was untouchable. The comments got bolder. If something broke, he'd glance at me and say, "Anthony probably messed with it." If my mom couldn't find something, he'd joke, "Better check his room." Always said with a grin, always framed as a joke. And every time, my parents would sigh or tell him to knock it off, but never seriously. Never with consequences. The damage was already done. The idea had been planted. I stopped inviting friends over. I didn't want anyone else to see how I was treated, or worse, to become part of it. I spent more time outside, walking around the neighborhood, sitting on park benches just to avoid being home. When I was home, I stayed in my room, door closed, music low, trying to be invisible. I felt like a guest in my own house, one wrong move away from being accused of something else. The breaking point didn't come all at once. It came in layers. First, it was my phone. One afternoon, my dad called me into the living room. He was holding it in his hand. "We need to talk," he said. That phrase alone made my heart drop. He said Mark had told him I'd been acting secretive, that I'd been hiding things. So they'd gone through my phone while I was in the shower. They said they were just being cautious. I felt exposed, violated. There was nothing incriminating on my phone, because I wasn't doing anything wrong, but that didn't matter. The message was clear. My privacy was a privilege, not a right. And it could be taken away at any time, based on nothing more than my brother's word. Then it was my room. My mom started cleaning it while I was at school. She said she was helping. I knew she was looking for something. Proof. Evidence. Anything that would justify the suspicion she couldn't quite let go of. Every time I came home and saw something moved, something touched, I felt a little more hollow. Mark, meanwhile, was living his best life. He stayed out late. He skipped chores. He borrowed money and never paid it back. When my parents confronted him, he'd get defensive, say they were nagging him, accuse them of treating him like a child. Somehow, that always turned into them apologizing to him. I watched it happen over and over again, like a script everyone knew by heart. The shocking betrayal came on a Sunday afternoon. My grandparents were coming over. That alone made everyone tense. My mom cared deeply about appearances, and my grandparents were big on family values, respect, and reputation. Before they arrived, my parents called Mark and me into the kitchen. My dad cleared his throat and said, "We need to set some boundaries for today." I didn't know what that meant until he looked directly at me. "We don't want any misunderstandings," he said carefully. "So it's best if you keep to yourself. Stay polite. Don't cause issues." I stared at him. "What issues?" My mom jumped in. "We just mean, you know how things have been. We don't want to bring up old stuff." Old stuff. That's what my character assassination had been reduced to. Then Mark spoke. "Yeah, Anthony, just don't be weird today, okay?" Something snapped inside me. I said, quietly but clearly, "I didn't do anything wrong." The room went silent. My mom's expression hardened. "This isn't the time," she said. "Why do you always do this?" "Always do what? Defend myself?" I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded. I swallowed everything I wanted to say and nodded. When my grandparents arrived, things started fine. Polite conversation. Coffee. Small talk. I sat on the edge of the room, answering questions when asked, trying not to draw attention to myself. Mark was loud, charming, telling stories, making everyone laugh. At one point, my grandma commented on how responsible he was becoming. I felt my jaw tighten. Then my grandpa asked a simple question. "So, Anthony, how's school going?" Before I could answer, Mark laughed. "Depends who you ask." Everyone looked at him. My mom shot him a warning look, but it was weak. "What's that supposed to mean?" my grandpa asked. Mark shrugged. "Nothing. Just joking." But the damage was done. The room was tense again. And then, without warning, my dad said, "We had a little issue a while back. Nothing major." My heart dropped. My mom nodded. "Just some missing money. All sorted now." My grandma frowned. "Missing money?" Mark looked at me. And then he did it. He leaned forward and said, casually, "Anthony took it. He was punished." End of story. I felt like I'd been slapped. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "That's not true," I said. My voice was shaking, but I didn't care. "You know that's not true." My mom stood too. "Anthony, sit down." "No," I said. I'm not doing this again. Mark smirked. See? Defensive. That's how he always gets. My dad raised his voice. Enough. We're not discussing this in front of guests. My grandpa looked confused. My grandma looked uncomfortable. And I realized, in that moment, that my parents were willing to let me be humiliated, branded, and talked about like a problem child, as long as it kept the peace with everyone else. That was the betrayal. Not just Mark lying again, but my parents letting him. Choosing silence. Choosing comfort over truth. Choosing him over me. I grabbed my jacket and walked out the front door without another word. No one stopped me. As I walked down the street, my hands shaking, my chest tight, one thought kept looping in my head. If they're willing to do this in front of everyone, what else are they willing to believe about me? That was the moment everything changed. Not because the truth came out, but because I finally understood something I'd been avoiding for months. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was who they were choosing to be. I didn't go far that night. I walked until the houses started to blur together, until the anger burned itself into something quieter and heavier. Eventually, I ended up sitting on the curb a few streets away, knees pulled to my chest, staring at nothing. I remember thinking, very clearly, that I didn't know where I belonged anymore. Going back home felt impossible, but there wasn't anywhere else to go. I was 15, no car, no money, no backup plan. Just this sinking realization that the place that was supposed to protect me had quietly decided I was expendable. When I finally went back, it was late. The house was dark. Everyone was asleep. No one had called. No one had texted. That hurt more than I expected. I went straight to my room and closed the door as softly as I could, like I was afraid of reminding the house I still existed. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. The way Mark said it so casually. The way my parents didn't stop him. The way my grandparents looked at me, confused and uncomfortable, like they didn't quite know what to believe. I felt smaller than I ever had. The weeks that followed were some of the worst of my life. School became a blur. My grades slipped. Not because I wasn't capable, but because I couldn't focus. My mind was constantly racing, half expecting the next accusation, the next sideways comment. I stopped raising my hand in class. Stopped talking to friends about anything real. I didn't want to explain. I didn't want pity. I especially didn't want someone telling me to just talk to my parents, as if I hadn't tried that 100 times already. At home, the tension was constant. My parents acted like nothing had happened. They were polite, civil, but distant. Conversations with me were short and practical. Did you do your homework? Dinner's ready. Don't forget to take out the trash. No warmth. No curiosity. No acknowledgement of what they'd let happen. Mark, on the other hand, seemed energized. Like he'd won something. He'd hum to himself, lounge around, make comments just loud enough for me to hear. He even started bringing friends over more often, parading his life through the house while I stayed hidden in my room. One night, I overheard him on the phone, laughing. "Nah, they'll believe whatever I say," he said. I froze on the stairs, my heart pounding. He kept talking, oblivious. "Anthony, please. He's the family screw-up. Always has been." Something inside me broke then. Not loudly. Not all at once. It was more like a quiet fracture, the kind that doesn't bleed but never heals quite right. I stopped trying to clear my name. That sounds backwards, but it was survival. Every attempt I'd made to defend myself had only made things worse. So I withdrew. I became exactly what they already thought I was. Distant, quiet, detached. I did my chores. I followed rules. I said as little as possible. On the surface, I was the easy kid again. Inside, I was done. Rock bottom came a few months later, in a way I didn't expect. I found out my parents had been taking money from the small savings account my grandparents had helped me open years earlier. It wasn't a lot. Birthday money. Holiday cash. Little bits I'd saved over time. I noticed because the balance was lower than it should have been when I checked it at the bank for a school project. When I asked my mom about it, she didn't deny it. "We needed it," she said. "Mark had expenses." I remember standing there, stunned. That was my money. She sighed, like I was being difficult. "You weren't using it." I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded and walked away. That was the moment I truly understood that fairness didn't exist in that house. There was no invisible scale balancing things out. There was just Mark, and then there was me. I cried that night, quietly, into my pillow, so no one would hear. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was exhausted. It was the kind of crying that comes when you finally stop hoping things will get better on their own. And then, slowly, something shifted. It didn't happen because my parents apologized. They didn't. It didn't happen because Mark got exposed. He didn't. It happened because I realized something important. If no one in that house was going to protect me, I was going to have to do it myself. The first step was small. I got a job. It was part-time, after school, at a grocery store a few bus stops away. Stocking shelves. Nothing glamorous. But it was mine. My own money. My own hours. My own proof that I could exist outside the narrative my family had written for me. I didn't tell my parents at first. I just started working, coming home tired but strangely lighter. With that first paycheck, I did something symbolic. I opened a new bank account, one my parents didn't have access to. Standing there at the counter, signing the papers, I felt a sense of control I hadn't felt in months. It wasn't about the money. It was about ownership. I started saving. Quietly. Carefully. Every dollar felt like a small act of rebellion. At work, something unexpected happened. People trusted me. My manager complimented my reliability. Coworkers joked with me, asked me questions, treated me like a normal person. Not a suspect. Not a problem. Just Anthony. That alone was healing in a way I hadn't anticipated. I also found refuge at the library. After work or school, I'd go there instead of home. I read everything I could get my hands on. Not just for school, but for myself. Books about psychology, about finance, about people who'd built something out of nothing. I didn't have a grand plan yet, but I was laying groundwork without even realizing it. Mark noticed the change before my parents did. "You think you're better than us now?" he asked one night, when I came home late from work. I shrugged. "I'm just busy." He scoffed. "Don't forget where you came from." I looked at him and thought, I won't. My parents eventually found out about the job. They didn't stop me. They didn't encourage me either. My mom made a comment about how it was good for me to learn responsibility. I almost laughed at the irony. The real rise didn't come all at once. It was quiet, invisible to everyone but me. Better grades, more confidence at work, a sense of identity that wasn't tied to my family's opinion of me. I started thinking about the future, about leaving, about building a life where no one could rewrite my character with a single accusation. But even as I grew stronger, the past didn't disappear. The lies still hung in the air, unspoken but present. The missing money, the bank statement, the truth that had almost surfaced and then been buried again. I hadn't forgotten it. I was storing it, filing it away, because deep down, I knew something else too. Truth has a way of resurfacing, and when it did, I intended to be ready. That preparation, that quiet rebuilding, was happening right under their noses, and they had no idea how close they were to losing control of the story they'd told about me. That realization didn't bring me peace. It brought me patience. By the time I turned 17, I had learned how to live two lives under the same roof. On the surface, I was compliant, quiet, polite. I went to school, went to work, came home, did my chores, stayed out of the way. I didn't argue. I didn't bring up the past. I didn't correct anyone when they made comments about that phase or joked about me being the sneaky one. I let the narrative stand because I understood something I hadn't before. Confronting people who benefit from a lie rarely makes them abandon it. It just makes them defend it harder. Underneath that surface, though, something very different was happening. I was paying attention. I noticed patterns. Small things at first. The way Mark talked when he thought no one was listening. The way my parents avoided certain topics, but reacted strongly to others. The way money moved through the house without much oversight, always justified by urgency or convenience. I noticed how often my name still came up in conversations I wasn't part of. How easily my parents accepted Mark's version of events without checking details. And I noticed something else too. Mark was getting careless. He wasn't subtle anymore. He bragged about things he shouldn't have. He complained loudly about being broke while flashing new clothes and gadgets. He borrowed money from my parents constantly, always with a story attached. Sometimes it was school. Sometimes it was friends. Sometimes it was vague emergencies that never quite added up. My parents grumbled, but paid anyway. They always did. What they didn't realize was that I was keeping mental notes. The setup didn't start as revenge. Not consciously. It started as self-preservation. I wanted insurance. Proof. Something solid I could hold on to in case I ever needed to defend myself again. Because I had learned the hard way that truth without evidence meant nothing in that house. So I started collecting details. Dates, amounts, conversations. I didn't write anything down at first. I memorized. Mark withdrew cash almost every Friday. Usually small amounts, but consistent. He complained about not having money on Tuesdays, right before my mom went grocery shopping. My dad's wallet was often left unattended on the kitchen counter. Mark knew exactly when my parents got paid. He knew when they were distracted. He knew when they were tired. One evening, while I was cleaning the living room, Mark tossed his jacket onto the couch and went upstairs. I picked it up to fold it, something my mom had asked me to do, and felt something stiff in the pocket. I froze. For a split second, instinct told me to put it back and walk away. Old habits. Fear. Conditioning. Instead, I reached into the pocket. It was a folded receipt. ATM withdrawal. The date jumped out at me immediately. It was from months earlier. Not just any month. The same month the money went missing from my mom's purse. My hands were shaking as I unfolded it further. The amount matched. Exactly. I stared at that piece of paper like it might vanish if I blinked. This was it. This was what I'd been denied for so long. Proof. Actual, physical proof. Not feelings. Not arguments. Not memories. A fact. I folded it back up and slid it into my pocket. That was the moment the setup truly began. I didn't confront him. I didn't show my parents. I didn't even react outwardly. I waited. I knew better now than to rush. One receipt wasn't enough. It could be dismissed, explained away, lost in excuses. I needed context. A pattern. A story that couldn't be waved off as coincidence. So I started documenting quietly. I bought a cheap notebook and kept it hidden in my backpack, not at home. I wrote down dates and times. Things I overheard. Moments that felt small but fit into a bigger picture. I took photos of receipts when I found them. I memorized bank app screens when Mark carelessly left his phone unlocked near me, not touching anything, just observing. I didn't cross lines that would get me caught. I stayed patient. At the same time, I started building allies, though I didn't think of them that way at first. My grandparents were the first. After that Sunday incident, they'd called a few times to check in on me. At first, the conversations were surface level. School, work, weather. But slowly, carefully, I let pieces slip. Not accusations, just experiences. How isolated I felt. How hard it had been. How confused I was about what had happened back then. I didn't say Mark stole the money. I let them come to their own conclusions. My grandma listened more than she spoke. My grandpa asked questions. Calm ones. Specific ones. The kind that made me feel seen instead of interrogated. I realized something important during those calls. They weren't blind. They'd just been kept at a distance. Then there was my manager at work. I didn't tell her my life story, but she noticed my drive. My consistency. She trusted me with more responsibility. Extra shifts. Closing duties. Small leadership roles. She wrote me a recommendation without me even asking. For the first time, an adult authority figure believed in me without suspicion attached. That mattered more than she probably realized. As my 18th birthday approached, the tension at home intensified. Mark was spiraling in his own way. He'd failed a class, lost a job, burned through money faster than ever. My parents argued about him constantly, though never in front of him. When they did talk to him, it was gentle, careful, like they were afraid he'd break if they pushed too hard. One night, I overheard my dad say, "We just need to get him through this rough patch." I almost laughed. Mark's entire life was a rough patch, padded by their denial. Meanwhile, I was planning my exit. I applied for scholarships. Quietly. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't want their opinions. I filled out forms at the library. I stayed up late writing essays about perseverance, resilience, overcoming obstacles. I never mentioned my family directly, but every word was shaped by them, by what they'd put me through. And slowly, responses started coming back. Acceptance letters, small grants, opportunities. Each one felt like another brick in a foundation they didn't know I was laying. The real opportunity came unexpectedly. My grandparents decided to host a family gathering. Not a holiday, not a birthday, just a dinner. They said they missed everyone and wanted us all together. My parents were eager. Mark didn't care either way. I said yes without hesitation, because by then, I knew something they didn't. My grandma had asked me, gently, during one of our calls, "Anthony, are you sure about what happened back then?" And this time, I hadn't said, "I think so." I'd said yes. I told her I had proof. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. She didn't ask to see it. She didn't demand details. She just said, "All right," in a tone that told me she believed me. That dinner wasn't about food. It was about timing. In the weeks leading up to it, Mark grew more reckless. He borrowed money from my grandparents without telling my parents. He blamed me for something breaking in the garage. He even joked, loudly, about how easy it was to get away with things if you knew who people trusted. Every comment, every action, just added fuel. By the time the dinner date arrived, I had everything lined up. Receipts, notes, witnesses, patterns. I didn't plan to explode. I didn't want a dramatic confrontation. I wanted something far more effective. I wanted the truth to emerge slowly, undeniably, in a way that forced everyone to sit with it, to feel it, to own it. As we pulled into my grandparents' driveway that evening, I felt strangely calm. Mark walked ahead, confident as ever. My parents followed, already talking about dessert. I stepped out of the car last, adjusted my jacket, and thought to myself, this is the last time they see me as the person they think they know. Because once this started, there was no going back. And they had no idea what they were about to lose. Dinner started the way it always did at my grandparents' house. Polite, predictable. The table set neatly, food laid out like it was meant to smooth over anything uncomfortable. My grandma moved around the kitchen with quiet purpose, my grandpa poured drinks, and my parents slipped easily into their familiar roles. Mark was loud, relaxed, confident. He laughed too much. He always did when he thought he was untouchable. I stayed quiet. Not because I was nervous, but because I didn't need to fill the space anymore. Halfway through dinner, my grandpa cleared his throat. The sound cut through the chatter in a way that made everyone pause. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He just said, "Before dessert, there's something I want to talk about." My mom smiled politely. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," he said. Then he looked directly at Mark. "That depends on how honest everyone wants to be." Mark chuckled. "What's this about?" My grandpa didn't answer him right away. Instead, he reached under the table and pulled out a thin folder. Not thick, not dramatic, just enough to matter. He placed it on the table and slid it toward the center. "I've been going over some old bank statements," he said calmly. "Mine, your parents, and some others." The room went still. My dad frowned. "Dad, what is this?" My grandpa opened the folder. He didn't rush. He laid things out one by one, like he was teaching a lesson. ATM withdrawal slips, printed bank records, dates highlighted neatly. He tapped one page with his finger. "This withdrawal happened on a Tuesday afternoon, several years ago. $40. Does that date sound familiar to anyone?" My mom's face drained of color. Mark shifted in his chair. "Why are we digging up old stuff?" "Because it was never resolved," my grandma said gently, her voice steady but firm. "And because Anthony showed me something I couldn't ignore." My parents turned to look at me. Really look at me. Not the way they usually did, through a lens of assumption, but with something closer to confusion. My grandpa continued. "That same day, money went missing from your mother's purse. Anthony was punished for it." My dad swallowed. "We thought he took it." "Yes," my grandpa said. "You thought that? Because Mark told you he did." Mark laughed, sharp and defensive. "This is ridiculous." My grandpa slid another paper forward. This receipt was found in Mark's jacket months later. Same date, same amount, same ATM. Silence. I watched my parents' faces as the pieces clicked together, slowly and painfully. My mom stared at the paper like it might rearrange itself if she looked long enough. My dad leaned back in his chair, hands pressed flat against the table. "That's not all," my grandma said. "There's a pattern. Repeated withdrawals. Always on days when you were distracted. Always small enough not to notice right away." Mark's smile vanished. "So what? You think I stole from everyone?" "I think," my grandpa said evenly, "that you lied about your brother. And you let him carry the consequences for years." Mark stood up, so fast his chair tipped backward. "This is insane. You're all ganging up on me." "No," my dad said quietly. That word landed harder than any shout. He was staring at Mark, his expression unreadable. "We're finally listening." Mark turned to my mom. "You know me. You know I wouldn't do that." She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You said you were sure it was Anthony." "I was," Mark snapped. I thought I was." "You didn't think," she said. "You accused." The room felt like it was cracking open. Not violently, but completely. There was no yelling. No dramatic explosion. Just the slow collapse of a lie that had been propped up by convenience and favoritism. My dad pushed his chair back and stood. "We punished him," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "We took his phone. We grounded him. We watched him pull away and said nothing." My mom covered her mouth with her hand. Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't soften what she'd done. They didn't undo years of silence. Mark looked around, realizing the ground beneath him was gone. "So what now?" he demanded. "You all just believe him?" My grandpa shook his head. "This isn't about believing. This is about evidence." Mark laughed again, but it was hollow. "He planned this. He's always been like this." I finally spoke. My voice was calm, steady. "I didn't plan anything. I waited. Because I knew if I spoke too soon, you'd talk your way out of it." Again, my parents flinched. "I didn't want revenge," I continued. "I wanted the truth. I wanted my name back." My mom stood and walked over to me slowly, like she wasn't sure I'd stay put. "Anthony," she said, tears spilling now, "I'm so sorry." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I realized something important. Her apology wasn't nothing, but it wasn't everything either. "I accept that you're sorry," I said, "but that doesn't erase what happened." My dad nodded, his eyes wet. "You're right." Mark scoffed. "You're all overreacting." My grandpa turned to him, his voice firm for the first time that night. "No, you are finally facing consequences." He told Mark that the money he'd borrowed from them was no longer a gift. It was a debt. That trust, once broken, wouldn't be handed back lightly. That help would now come with accountability. My parents told him he would be moving out within the month, that they would help him find a place, but not fund his lifestyle anymore, not cover for him, not clean up his messes. Mark looked stunned, angry, small. For the first time, he had nowhere to point the blame. The fallout didn't end that night. It rippled outward. My parents tried to repair things, awkwardly at first. Therapy was mentioned. Conversations happened that should have happened years earlier. Some days were better than others. But I didn't stay. A week later, I packed my things. Not in anger, not in a rush, just deliberately. I moved into a small place near campus, paid for with scholarships and savings I'd built quietly over years. My parents helped me move, their apologies still tentative, still learning how to exist without denial as a shield. Mark barely spoke to me after that. When he did, there was no apology, just bitterness. That was fine. I wasn't waiting for one. What mattered was this: the story had changed. Not because I shouted it, but because I proved it. I didn't win by destroying anyone. I won by reclaiming myself, by refusing to carry a lie that was never mine to begin with. And the last thing my grandpa said to me as I walked out of that house for the final time stayed with me. "Truth doesn't need to rush," he said. "It just needs patience." He was right.